think it's working again. Okay. We are much earlier than what I said I'd be coming back, but that's just because of how much some of you guys really enjoyed this. Yeah. I'm gonna give it maybe a minute or two for people to come back. I already see some of you. But yeah, your eagerness to continue the book has given me more motivation to start reading it again. So yeah, here I am. We're gonna read at least the next 2 chapters. I read 4 the first part through. Let's see. Table of contents. We're gonna start with I play Pinnacle with a horse. Capture the flag. Yes, capture the flag. We'll read another 4, I think. Which might mean another 2 hours here, but I feel like that's a good section, is I play Pinochle with a horse to capture the flag is just a really good portion to read at a time. Go in chunks of 4, I guess. Okay. I also will read, maybe on stream I'll read Heroes of Olympus. I'm definitely going to reread that whole series again. I've actually reread that more often than Percy Jackson, though, because they were the only books I have on my Kindle. I only have The Lost Hero, The Son of Neptune, and The Mark of Athena on my Kindle, because those were the only 3 out at the time, and they're the only 3 I have on that Kindle. And I've read The Son of Neptune at least 4 or 5 times. Please help me. Glad to see you back, Opal. I was thinking about you. I didn't want to, make it go too late so you can read, listen. Yeah. You've never heard of this book before? Galaxy, how have you never heard of The Lightning Thief? I love this book. Well, it's Percy Jackson, the Olympian series. The Lightning Thief's the first book, so. Where did I put my water? Did I leave my water upstairs? I think I did. I will be right back to get my water, and then I will start reading the book. Okay. I have returned. I'm really glad to be the one to introduce some of you to this series. I personally was introduced to the series by my favorite librarian, so I'm really excited. We're not going to talk about the movie, we're talking about the book. Now, if I want to get this done at a reasonable time, I better start now. We're not talking about the movie because it's getting a new TV adaptation, and if that sucks, I'm gonna cry. Okay, so, who is ready for Chapter 5? I play Pinnacle with a horse. Just a reminder, my pronunciations will not be perfect. I do not speak Greek or know that much about mythology, besides, in terms of pronunciation, at least. Okay, Chapter 5. Okay. I had weird dreams full of barnyard animals. Most of them wanted to kill me. The rest wanted food. I must have woken up several times, but what I heard and saw made no sense, so I just passed out again. I remember lying in a soft bed, being spoon-fed something that tasted like buttered popcorn, only it was pudding. The girl with the curly blonde hair hovered over me, smirking as she scraped drips off my chin with a spoon. When she saw my eyes open, she asked, "What will happen at the summer solstice?" I managed to croak, "What?" She looked around as if afraid someone would overhear. "What's going on? What was stolen? We've only got a few weeks." "I'm sorry," I mumbled. "I don't..." Somebody knocked on the door, and the girl quickly filled my mouth with pudding. The next time I woke up, the girl was gone. A husky blonde dude, like a surfer, stood in the corner of the bedroom, keeping watch over me. He had blue eyes, at least a dozen of them, on his cheeks, his forehead, the backs of his hands. When I finally came around for good, there was nothing weird about my surroundings, except that they were nicer than I was used to. I was sitting in a deck chair on a huge porch, gazing across the meadow at green hills in the distance. The breeze smelled like strawberries. There was a blanket over my legs, a pillow behind my neck. All that was great, but my mouth felt like a scorpion had been using it for a nest. My tongue was dry and nasty, and every one of my teeth hurt. On the table next to me was a tall drink. It looked like iced apple juice, with a green straw and a paper parasol stuck through the maraschino cherry. My hand was so weak, I almost dropped the glass once I got my fingers around it. "Careful," a familiar voice said. Grover was leaning against the porch railing, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Under one arm, he cradled a shoebox. He was wearing blue jeans, Converse, high tops, and a bright orange t-shirt that said Camp Half-Blood. Just plain old Grover. Not the goat boy. So, maybe I'd had a nightmare. Maybe my mom was okay. Maybe we were still on vacation and we'd stopped here at this big house for some reason. And, "You saved my life," Grover said. The least I could do... I went back to the hill. I thought you might want this." Reverently, he placed the shoebox into my lap. Inside was a black and white bull's horn. The base jagged from being broken off, the tip splattered with dry blood. It hadn't been a nightmare. "The Minotaur," I said. Percy, it isn't a good idea. That's what they call him in the Greek myths, isn't it?" I demanded. "The Minotaur, half man, half bull." Grover shifted uncomfortably. "You've been out for 2 days. How much do you remember?" "My mom, is she really..." He looked down. I stared across the meadow. There were groves of trees, a winding stream, acres of strawberries spread out under the blue sky. The valley was surrounded by rolling hills, and the tallest one, directly in front of us, was the one with the huge pine tree on top. Even that looked beautiful in the sunlight. My mother was gone. The whole world should be black and cold. Nothing should look beautiful. "I'm sorry," Grover sniffled. "I'm a failure. I'm the worst satyr in the world." He moaned, stomping his foot so hard it came off. I mean, the Converse high top came off. The inside was filled with styrofoam, except for a hoof-shaped hole. "Oh, sticks," he mumbled. Thunder rolled across the clear sky. As he struggled to get his hoof back on, in the fake foot, I thought, well, that settles it. Grover was a satyr. I was ready to bet that if I shaved his curly brown hair, I'd find tiny horns on his head. But I was too miserable to care that satyrs existed, or even minotaurs. All that meant was my mom really had been squeezed into nothingness, dissolved into yellow light. I was alone, an orphan. I'd have to live with. Smelly Gabe? No, that would never happen. I would live on the streets first. I would pretend I was 17 and join the army. I'd do something. Grover was still sniffling. The poor kid, poor goat, satyr, whatever, looked as if he expected to be hit. I said, "It wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was. I was supposed to protect you." "Did my mother ask you to protect me?" "No, but that's my job. I'm a keeper. At least, I was." "But why—" I suddenly felt dizzy, my vision swimming. "Don't strain yourself," Grover said. "Here." He helped me hold my glass and put the straw to my lips. I recoiled at the taste, because I was expecting apple juice. It wasn't that at all. It was chocolate chip cookies, liquid cookies, and not just any cookies. My mom's homemade blue chocolate chip cookies, buttery and hot, with chips still melting. Drinking it, my whole body felt warm and good, full of energy. My grief didn't go away, but I felt as if my mom had just brushed her hand against my cheek, given me a cookie the way she used to when I was small, and told me everything was going to be okay. Before I knew it, I'd drained the whole glass. I stared into it. Sure, I'd just had a warm drink, but the ice cubes hadn't even melted. "Was it good?" Grover asked. I nodded. "What did it taste like?" He sounded so wistful I felt guilty. "Sorry," I said. "I should have let you taste." His eyes got wide. "No, that's not what I meant. I just wondered." "Chocolate chip cookies," I said. "My mom's. Homemade." He sighed. "And how do you feel?" "Like I could throw Nancy Bobofit 100 yards. "That's good," he said. "That's good. I don't think you could risk drinking any more of that stuff." "What do you mean?" He took the empty glass from me gingerly, as if it were dynamite, and set it back on the table. "Come on. Chiron and Mr. D are waiting." The porch wrapped all the way around the farmhouse. My legs felt wobbly trying to walk that far. Grover offered to carry the Minotaur horn, but I held on to it. I'd paid for that souvenir the hard way. I wasn't going to let it go. As we came around the opposite end of the house, I caught my breath. We must have been on the north shore of Long Island, because on the side of the house, the valley marched all the way up to the water, which glittered about a mile in the distance. Between here and there, I simply couldn't process everything I was seeing. The landscape was dotted with buildings that looked like ancient Greek architecture, an open-air pavilion, an amphitheater, a circular arena, except that they all looked brand new, their white marble columns sparkling in the sun. In a nearby sandpit, a dozen high school-age kids and satyrs played volleyball. Canoes glided across a small lake. Kids in bright orange t-shirts like Grover's were chasing each other around a cluster of cabins, nestled in the woods. Some shot targets at an archery range, others rode horses down a wooded trail, and unless I was hallucinating, some of their horses had wings. Down at the end of the porch, two men sat across from each other at the card table. The blonde-haired girl who spoon-fed me popcorn-flavored pudding was leaning on the porch rail next to them. The man facing me was small, but porky. He had a red nose, big watery eyes, and curly hair, so black it was almost purple. He looked like those paintings of baby angels. What do you call them? Hubbubs? No, cherubs. That's it. He looked like a cherub who turned middle-age in a trailer park. He wore a tiger-patterned Hawaiian shirt, and he would have fit right in at one of Gabe's poker parties. Except I got the feeling that this guy could have outgambled even my stepfather. "That's Mr. D," Grover murmured to me. "He's the camp director. Be polite. That girl, that's Annabeth Chase. She's just a camper, but she's been here longer than about anybody. And you already know Chiron." He pointed at the guy whose back was to me. First, I realized he was sitting in a wheelchair. Then I recognized the tweed jacket, the thinning brown hair, and the scraggly beard. "Mr. Brunner?" I cried. The Latin teacher turned and smiled at me. His eyes had that mischievous glint they sometimes got in class when he pulled a pop quiz and made all the multiple-choice answers B. "Ah, good, Percy," he said. Now we have 4 for Pinochle. He offered me a chair to the right of Mr. D, who looked at me with bloodshot eyes and heaved a great sigh. "Oh, I suppose I must say it. Welcome to Camp Half-Blood. There. Now don't expect me to be glad to see you." Thanks. I scooted a little farther away from him, because if there was one thing I had learned from living with Gabe, it was how to tell when an adult has been hitting the happy juice. If Mr. D was a stranger to alcohol, I was a satyr. "Annabeth," Mr. Brunner called to the blonde girl. She came forward and Mr. Brunner introduced us. "This young lady nursed you back to health, Percy. Annabeth, my dear, why don't you go check on Percy's bunk? We'll be putting him in cabin 11 for now." Annabeth said, "Sure, Chiron." She was probably my age, maybe a couple of inches taller and a whole lot more athletic looking. With her deep tan, her curly blonde hair, and she was almost exactly what I thought a stereotypical California girl would look like, except her eyes ruined the image. They were startling gray, like storm clouds, pretty but intimidating too, as if she were analyzing the best way to take me down in a fight. She glanced at the Minotaur horn in my hands, then back at me. I imagined she was going to say, "You killed a Minotaur?" Or, "Wow, you're so awesome," or something like that. Instead, she said, "You drool when you sleep." Then she sprinted off down the lawn, her blonde hair flying behind her. "So," I said, anxious to change the subject, "you, work here, Mr. Brunner?" "Not Mr. Brunner," the ex-Mr. Brunner said. "I'm afraid that was a pseudonym. You may call me Chiron." "Okay." Totally confused, I looked at the director. "And Mr. D. Does that stand for something?" Mr. D stopped shuffling the cards. He looked at me like I'd just belched loudly. "Young man, names are powerful things. You don't just go around using them for no reason." "Oh, right, sorry." "I must say, Percy," Chiron Brunner broke in, "I'm glad to see you alive. It's been a long time since I've made a house call to a potential camper. I'd hate to think I've wasted my time." "House call?" "My year at Yancey Academy to instruct you." "We have satyrs at most schools, of course, keeping a lookout, but Grover alerted me as soon as he met you. He sensed you were something special, so I decided to come upstate. I convinced the other Latin teacher to, take a leave of absence. I tried to remember the beginning of the school year. It seemed like so long ago, but I did have a fuzzy memory of there being another Latin teacher my first week at Yancey. Then, without explanation, he had disappeared and Mr. Brunner had taken the class." "You came to Yancey to teach me?" I asked. Chiron nodded. "Honestly, I wasn't sure about you at first. We contacted your mother, let her know we were keeping an eye on you in case you were ready for Camp Half-Blood, but you still had so much left to learn. Nevertheless, you made it here alive, and that's always the first test." "Grover," Mr. D said impatiently, "are you playing or not?" "Yes, sir," Grover trembled as he took the 4th chair, "though I don't know why he should be so afraid of a pudgy little man in a tiger print Hawaiian shirt." "You do know how to play pinochle," Mr. D eyed me suspiciously. "I'm afraid not," I said. "I'm afraid not, sir," he said. "Sir," I repeated. I was liking the camp director less and less. "Well," he told me, "it is, along with gladiator fighting and Pac-Man, one of the greatest games ever invented by humans. I would expect all civilized young men to know the rules." "I am sure the boy can learn," Chiron said. "Please," I said. "What is this place? What am I doing here? Chiron, why would you go to Yancey Academy just to teach me?" Mr. D snorted. "I asked the same question." The camp director dealt the cards. Grover flinched every time one landed in his pile. Chiron smiled at me sympathetically, the way he used to in Latin class, as if to let me know that no matter what my average was, I was his star student. He expected me to have the right answer. "Percy," he said, "did your mother tell you nothing?" She said, I remembered her sad eyes looking out over the sea. She told me she was afraid to send me here, even though my father had wanted her to. She said that once I was here, I probably couldn't leave. She wanted to keep me close to her. Typical, Mr. D said. That's how they usually get killed. Young man, are you bidding or not? What? I asked. He explained impatiently how you bid in Pinochle, and I did. I'm afraid there's not much to tell, Chiron said. I'm afraid our usual orientation film won't be sufficient. No, Chiron decided. Well, Percy, you know your friend Grover is a satyr. You know, he pointed to the horn in the shoebox, that you've killed the Minotaur, no small feat either, lad. What you may not know is that great powers are at work in your life. Gods, the forces you call Greek gods, are very much alive. I stared at the others around the table. I waited for somebody to yell, "Not." But all I got was Mr. D yelling, "Oh, a royal marriage! Trick, trick!" he cackled as he tallied up his points. Mr. D, Grover asked timidly, "If you're not going to eat it, could I have your Diet Coke can?" Eh? Oh, all right. Grover bit a huge shard out of the empty aluminum can and chewed it mournfully. Wait, I told Chiron. You're telling me there's such a thing as God? Well now, Chiron said. God, capital G God, that's a different matter altogether. We shan't deal with the metaphysical. Metaphysical? But you were just talking about, gods, plural, as in great beings that controlled the forces of nature and human endeavors, the immortal gods of Olympus. That's a smaller matter. Smaller? Yes, quite. The gods we discussed in Latin class. Zeus, I said. Hera, Apollo, you mean them? There it was again, a distant thunder on a cloudless day. Young man, said Mr. D, I would really be less casual about throwing those names around, if I were you. But they're stories, I said. They're myths to explain lightning and the seasons and stuff. They're what people believed before there was science. Science, Mr. D scoffed. And tell me, Perseus Jackson. I flinched when he said my real name, which I never told anybody. What will people think of your science 2,000 years from now? Mr. D continued. They will call it primitive mumbo-jumbo. That's what. Oh, I love mortals. They have absolutely no sense of perspective. They think they've come so far. And have they, Chiron? Look at this boy and tell me. I wasn't liking Mr. D much, but there was something about the way he called me a mortal, as if he wasn't. It was enough to put a lump in my throat to suggest why Grover was dutifully minding his cards, chewing his soda can, and keeping his mouth shut. Percy, Chiron said, you may choose to believe or not, but the fact is that immortal means immortal. Can you imagine that for a moment, never dying, never fading, existing just as you are for all time? I was about to answer off the top of my head that it sounded like a pretty good deal, but the tone of Chiron's voice made me hesitate. You mean whether people believed in you or not, I said. Exactly, Chiron agreed. If you were a god, how would you like being called a myth, an old story to explain lightning? What if I told you, Perseus Jackson, that someday people would call you a myth, just created to explain how little boys can get over losing their mothers? My heart pounded. He was trying to make me angry for some reason, but I wasn't going to let him. I wouldn't like it, but I don't believe in gods. Oh, you better, Mr. D murmured, before one of them incinerates you. Grover said, Please, sir, he's just lost his mother. He's in shock. A lucky thing, too, Mr. D grumbled, playing a card. Bad enough I'm confined to this miserable job working with boys who don't even believe. He waved his hands, and a goblet appeared on the table, as if the sunlight had bent momentarily and woven the air into glass. The goblet filled itself with red wine. My jaw dropped, but Chiron hardly looked up. Mr. D, he warned, your restrictions. Mr. D looked at the wine and feigned surprise. Dear me. He looked at the sky and yelled, Old habits, sorry. More thunder. Mr. D waved his hand again. The wine glass changed into a fresh can of Diet Coke. He unhappily popped the top of the soda and went back to his card game. Chiron winked at me. Mr. D offended his father a while back. Took a fancy to a wood nymph who had been declared off limits. A wood nymph? I repeated, still staring at the Diet Coke can like it was from outer space. Yes, Mr. D confessed. Father loves to punish me. The first time, prohibition. Ghastly. Absolutely horrid. 10 years. The second time, well, she really was pretty, and I couldn't stay away. The second time, he sent me here. Half-Blood Hill, summer camp for brats like you. Be a better influence, he told me. Work with youths rather than tearing them down. Ha! Absolutely unfair. Mr. D sounded about 6 years old, like a pouting little kid. And, I stammered, your father is... De immortales, Chiron, Mr. D said. I thought you taught this boy the basics. My father is Zeus, of course. I ran through the D names from Greek mythology. Wine, the skin of a tiger, the satyrs that all seemed to work here. The way Grover cringed as if Mr. D were his master. You're Dionysus, I said, the god of wine. Mr. D rolled his eyes. What do they say these days, Grover? Do the children say, well, duh? Yes, Mr. D. Then, well, duh, Percy Jackson. Did you think I was Aphrodite, perhaps? You're a god. Yes, child. A god? You? He turned to look at me straight on, and I saw a kind of purplish fire in his eyes. A hint that this whiny, plump little man was only showing me the tiniest bit of his true nature. I saw visions of grapevines choking unbelievers to death. I saw drunken warriors insane with battle lust, sailors screaming as their hands turned to flippers, their faces elongating into dolphin snouts. I knew that if I pushed him, Mr. D would show me worse things. He'd plant a disease in my brain that would leave me wearing a straitjacket in a rubber room for the rest of my life. Would you like to test me, child? He said quietly. No, sir. The fire died a little. He turned back to his card game. I believe I win. Not quite, Mr. D, Chiron said. He set down a straight, tallied the points, and said, The game goes to me. I thought Mr. D was going to vaporize Chiron right out of his wheelchair, but he just sighed through his nose. If he were used to being beaten by the Latin teacher, he got up, and Grover rose too. I'm tired, Mr. D said. I believe I'll take a nap before the sing-along tonight. But first, Grover, we need to talk. Again, about your less-than-perfect performance on this assignment. Grover's face beaded with sweat. Yes, sir. Mr. D turned to me. Cabin 11, Percy Jackson, and mind your manners. He swept into the farmhouse, Grover following miserably. Will Grover be okay? I asked Chiron. Chiron nodded, though he looked a bit troubled. Old Dionysus isn't really mad. He just hates his job. He's been, grounded, I guess you would say, and he can't stand waiting another century before he's allowed to go back to Olympus. Mount Olympus, I said. You're telling me there really is a palace there? Well, now, there's Mount Olympus in Greece, and then there's the home of the gods, the convergence point of their powers, which did indeed used to be on Mount Olympus. It's still called Mount Olympus out of respect to their old ways, but the palace moves, Percy, just as the gods do. You mean the Greek gods are here? Like, in America? Well, certainly. The gods move with the heart of the West. The what? Come now, Percy. What you call Western civilization? Do you think it's just an abstract concept? No, it's a living force, a collective consciousness that has burned bright for thousands of years. The gods are part of it. You might even say they're the source of it, or at least, they're tied so tightly to it that they couldn't possibly fade, not unless all of Western civilization were obliterated. The fire started in Greece. Then, as you well know, or as I hope you know, since you passed my course, the heart of the fire moved to Rome, and so did the gods. Oh, different names, perhaps, Jupiter for Zeus, Venus for Aphrodite, and so on. But same forces, same gods. And then they died. Died? No. Did the West die? The gods simply moved. To Germany, to France, to Spain for a while. Wherever the flame was brightest, the gods were there. They spent several centuries in England. All you need to do is look at the architecture. People do not forget the gods. Every place they ruled for the last 3,000 years, you can see them in paintings and statues on the most important buildings. And yes, Percy, of course they are now in your United States. Look at your symbol, the eagle of Zeus. Look at the statue of Prometheus in the Rockefeller Center. The Greek facades of your government buildings in Washington. I defy you to find any American city where the Olympians are not prominently displayed in multiple places. Like it or not, and believe me, plenty of people weren't very fond of Rome either. America is now the heart of the flame. It is the great power of the West, and so Olympus is here. And we are here. It was all too much, especially for the fact that I seemed to be included in Chiron's we, as if I were a part of some club. Who are you, Chiron? Who am I? Chiron smiled. He shifted his weight as if he were going to get up out of his wheelchair, but I knew that was impossible. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Who are you? He mused. Well, that's quite a question. We all want answered, isn't it? But for now, we should get you a bunk in cabin 11. There will be new friends to meet, and plenty of time for lessons tomorrow. Besides, there will be s'mores at the campfire tonight, and I simply adore chocolates. And then he did rise from his wheelchair, but there was something odd about the way he did it. His blanket fell away from his legs, but the legs didn't move. His waist kept getting longer, rising above his belt. At first, I thought he was wearing very long white velvet underwear, but as he kept rising out of the chair, taller than any man, I realized that the velvet underwear wasn't underwear. It was the front of an animal, muscle and sinew under coarse white fur. The wheelchair wasn't a chair. It was some kind of container, an enormous box on wheels. Must have been magic, because there's no way it could have held all of him. A leg came out, a long and knobby-kneed with a huge polished hoof. Then another front leg, then hindquarters. And then the box was empty. Nothing but a metal shell with a couple of fake human legs attached. I stared at the horse who had just sprung from the wheelchair, a huge white stallion. But where its neck should be was the upper body of my Latin teacher, smoothly grafted onto the horse's trunk. What a relief, the centaur said. I had been cooped up in there for so long. My fetlocks had fallen asleep. Now come on, Percy Jackson. Let's meet the other campers. Okay. That is the end of that chapter. Finish the stream. So how did you like that chapter? We're taking our chapterly break, I suppose. What is this? An ink pen. This is getting good. That chapter was nothing. The next chapter is I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom, and that one's pretty great. Love that. Oh, you're gonna buy the book? I'm glad I have inspired you to read the Percy Jackson series. Yes, we're gonna keep going. I plan to read another 4 chapters, so another 3 at this point. Because that's just, like, the next section that makes sense. All the way to Capture the Flag. So we're gonna read through Capture the Flag, which is probably one of the most iconic chapters in the whole series. So stick around to the end because you don't want to miss that. It's very exciting. I've decided I'm going to keep these streams I'll make a playlist for them, Reading with Blue or something, and they'll all be there unlisted though, so you'll have to go through the playlist to find them, because they'll probably get taken down if I make them public. So it's like a secret club. And maybe I'll do more books. Oh, I'm sorry you came late. To summarize the last chapter, Percy woke up in camp, being nursed back to health, thinking everything was a dream. Grover came, brought him the Minotaur horn, and then brought him to Mr. D, where everything kind of got explained. Just explanation stuff, you know. Joy. I'm excited for Capture the Flag, but first I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Another amazing chapter, probably one of my favorites where there's explanation going on. How would you get to them? You'd go to my playlist tab, and you would just find the Blue story, like Reading with Blue or whatever I call the playlist, and it should be in there. Okay, on to reading. Chapter 6. I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Once I got over the fact that my Latin teacher was a horse, we had a nice tour, though I was careful not to walk behind him. I'd done Pooper Scooper Patrol in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade a few times, and I'm sorry, I did not trust Chiron's back end that way, the way I trusted his front end. We passed the volleyball pit, and several of the campers nudged each other. One pointed to the Minotaur horn I was carrying, another said, "That's him." Most of the campers were older than me. Their satyr friends were bigger than Grover, all of them trotting around in orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts, with nothing else to cover their bare, shady hindquarters. I wasn't normally shy, but the way they stared at me made me uncomfortable. I felt like they were expecting me to do a flip or something. I looked back at the farmhouse. It was a lot bigger than I'd realized. 4 stories tall, sky blue with white trim, like an upscale seaside resort. I was checking out the brass eagle weather vane on top when something caught my eye. A shadow in the uppermost window of the attic gable. Something had moved the curtain for just a second, and I got the distinct impression I was being watched. "What's up there?" I asked Chiron. He looked where I was pointing. His smile faded. "Just the attic." "Somebody lives there?" "No," he said with finality. "Not a single living thing." I got the feeling he was being truthful, but I was also sure something had moved that curtain. "Come along, Percy," Chiron said, his light-hearted tone now a little forced. "Lots to see." We walked through the strawberry fields, where campers were picking up bushels of berries, while a satyr played a tune on a reed pipe. Chiron told me that the camp grew a nice crop for export to New York restaurants in Mount Olympus. "It pays our expenses," he explained, "and the strawberries take almost no effort." He said Mr. D had this effect on fruit-bearing plants. They just went crazy when he was around. It worked best with wine grapes, but Mr. D was restricted from growing those, so they grew strawberries instead. I watched the satyr playing his pipe. His music was causing lines of bugs to leave the strawberry patch in every direction, like refugees fleeing a fire. I wondered if Grover could work that kind of magic with music. I wondered if he was still inside the farmhouse getting chewed out by Mr. D. "Grover won't get into too much trouble, will he?" I asked. Chiron. "I mean, he was a good protector, really." Chiron sighed. He shed his tweed jacket and draped it over his horse's back like a saddle. "Grover has big dreams, Percy, perhaps bigger than are reasonable. To reach his goal, he must first demonstrate great courage by succeeding as a keeper, finding a new camper and bringing him safely to Half-Blood Hill. But he did that." "I might agree with you," Chiron said, "but it's not my place to judge. Dionysius and the Council of Cloven Elders must decide. I'm afraid they might not see this assignment as a success. After all, Grover lost you in New York. Then there's the unfortunate fate of your mother, and the fact that Grover was unconscious when you dragged him over the property line. The council might question whether this shows any courage on Grover's part. I wanted to protest. None of what happened was Grover's fault. I also felt really, really guilty. If I hadn't given Grover the slip at the bus station, he might not have gotten in trouble. He'll get a second chance, won't he? Chiron winced. I'm afraid that was Grover's second chance. Percy, the council was not anxious to give him another either, after what happened the first time. 5 years ago, Olympus knows, I advised him to wait longer before trying again. He's still so small for his age. How old is he? Oh, 28. What? And he's in the 6th grade? Satyrs mature half as fast as humans, Percy. Grover's been the equivalent of a middle school student for the past 6 years. That's horrible. Quite, Chiron agreed. At any rate, Grover is a late bloomer, even by satyr standards, and not yet very accomplished at woodland magic. Alas, he was anxious to pursue his dream. Perhaps now he will find some other career. That's not fair, I said. What happened to the first time? Was it really so bad? Chiron looked away. Let's move along, shall we? But I wasn't quite ready to let the subject drop. Something had occurred to me when Chiron talked about my mother's fate, as if he were intentionally avoiding the word death. The beginnings of an idea, a tiny, hopeful fire, started forming in my mind. Chiron, I said, if the gods in Olympus are all that all that are real, yes, child? Does that mean the underworld's real too? Yeah, real too? Gosh, I can't read. Chiron's expression darkened. Yes, child. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. There is a place where spirits go after death. But for now, until we know more, I would urge you to put that out of your mind. What do you mean, until we know more? Come, Percy. Let's see the woods. As we got closer, I realized how huge the forest was. It took up at least a quarter of the valley, with trees so tall and thick you could imagine nobody had been in there since the Native Americans. Chiron said, the woods are stocked, if you care to try your luck, but go around armed. Stocked with what? I asked. Armed with what? You'll see. Capture the Flag is Friday night. Do you have your own sword and shield? My own? No, Chiron said. I don't suppose you do. I think a size 5 will do. I'll visit the armory later. No, Chiron said. Gosh, I just read that. Oh, Mello, you don't feel good? Yeah. I go take a break. You can access these chapters in the playlist, for sure. I won't delete them, don't worry. I wanted to ask what kind of summer camp had an armory, but there was too much else to think about, so the tour continued. We saw the archery range, the canoeing lake, the stables, which Chiron didn't seem to like very much, the javelin range, the sing-along amphitheater, and the arena, where Chiron said they held sword and spear fights. Sword and spear fights, I asked. Cabin challenges and all that, he explained. Not lethal, usually. Oh yes, and there's the mess hall. I will be done once I finish the Capture the Flag chapter. So that's in a few chapters. Oh gosh, where was I? Cabin challenges and all that, he explained. Not lethal, usually. Oh yes, and there's the mess hall. Chiron pointed to an outdoor pavilion framed in white Grecian columns on a hill overlooking the sea. There were a dozen stone picnic tables. No roof, no walls. What do you do if it rains? I asked. Chiron looked at me as if I'd gone a little weird. We still have to eat, don't we? I decided to drop the subject. Finally, he showed me the cabins. There were 12 of them nestled in the woods by the lake. They were arranged in a U with 2 at the base and 5 in a row on either side. And they were without a doubt the most bizarre collection of buildings I had ever seen. Except for the fact that each had a large brass number above the door. Odds on the left side, evens on the right. They looked absolutely nothing alike. Number 9 had smokestacks like a tiny factory. Number 4 had tomato vines on the walls and a roof made out of real grass. 7 seemed to be made of solid gold, which gleamed so much in the sunlight it was almost impossible to look at. They all faced a commons area, about the size of a soccer field, dotted with Greek statues, fountains, flower beds, and a couple of basketball hoops, which were more my speed. In the center of the field was a huge stone-lined fire pit. Even though it was a warm afternoon, the hearth smoldered. A girl about 9 years old was tending to the flames, poking the coals with a stick. The pair of cabins at the head of the field, numbers 1 and 2, looked like his and hers mausoleums. Big white marble boxes with heavy columns in front. Cabin 1 was the biggest and bulkiest of the 12. Its polished bronze door shimmered like a hologram, so that from different angles lightning bolts seemed to streak across them. Cabin 2 was more graceful somehow, with slimmer columns, garlanded with pomegranates and flowers. The walls were carved with images of peacocks. Zeus and Hera, I guessed? Correct, Chiron said. Their cabins look empty. Several of the cabins are, that's true. No one ever stays in 1 or 2. Okay, so each cabin had a different god, like a mascot? 12 cabins for the 12 Olympians. But why would some be empty? I stopped in front of the first cabin on the left. Cabin 3. It wasn't high and mighty like Cabin 1, but long, low, and solid. The outer walls were of rough gray stone, studded with pieces of seashell and coral, as if slabs had been hewn straight from the bottom of the ocean floor. I peeked inside the open doorway, and Chiron said, "Oh, I wouldn't do that." Before he could pull me back, I caught the salty scent of the interior, like the wind on the shore at Montauk. The interior walls glowed like abalone. There were 6 empty bunk beds, with silk sheets turned down, but there was no sign anyone had ever slept there. The place felt so sad and lonely. I was glad when Chiron put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Come along, Percy." Most of the other cabins were crowded with campers. Number 5 was bright red, real nasty paint job, as if the color had been splashed on with buckets and fists. The roof was lined with barbed wire. A stuffed wild boar's head hung over the doorway. Its eyes seemed to follow me inside. Inside I could see a bunch of mean-looking kids, both girls and boys, arm wrestling and arguing with each other, while rock music blared. The loudest was a girl, maybe 13 or 14. She wore a size XXXL Camp Half-Blood t-shirt under a camouflage jacket. She zeroed in on me and gave me an evil sneer. She reminded me of Nancy Bobofit, though the camper girl was much bigger and tougher looking, and her hair was long and stringy and brown instead of red. I kept walking, trying to stay clear of Chiron's hooves. "We haven't seen any other centaurs," I observed. "No," Chiron said sadly. My kinsmen are wild and barbaric folk, I'm afraid. You might encounter them in the wilderness or at major sporting events, but you won't see any here." "You said your name was Chiron. Are you really—" He smiled down at me. "The Chiron from the stories? Trainer of Hercules and all that?" "Yes, Percy, I am." "But shouldn't you be dead?" Chiron paused as if the question intrigued him. "I honestly don't know about should be. The truth is, I can't be dead. You see, eons ago, the gods granted my wish. I could continue the work I loved. I could be a teacher of heroes as long as humanity needed me. I gained much from that wish. I gave up much. But I'm still here, so I can only assume I'm still needed. I thought about being a teacher for 3,000 years. It wouldn't have made my top 10 things to wish for list. Doesn't it ever get boring?" No, he said. Horribly depressing at times, but never boring. Why depressing? Chiron seemed to turn hard of hearing again. Oh, look, he said. Annabeth is waiting for us. The blonde girl I'd met at the big house was reading a book at the front of the last cabin on the left, number 11. When we reached her, she looked me over critically, like she was still thinking about how much I drooled. I tried to see what she was reading, but I couldn't make out the title. I thought my dyslexia was acting up. Then I realized the title wasn't even English. The letters looked Greek to me. I mean, literally, Greek. There were pictures of temples and statues and different kinds of columns, like those in an architecture book. Annabeth, Chiron said, I have master's archery class at noon. Would you take Percy from here? Yes, sir. Cabin 11, Chiron told me, gesturing toward the doorway. Make yourself at home. Out of all the cabins, 11 looked the most like a regular old summer camp cabin, with emphasis on the old. The threshold was worn down, the brown paint peeling off. Over the doorway was one of those doctor's symbols, a winged pole with 2 snakes wrapped around it. What did they call it? A catechus? Caduceus? Words! I can't English. Inside, it was packed with people, both boys and girls, way more than the number of bunk beds. Sleeping bags were spread all over the floor. It looked like a gym where the Red Cross had set up an evacuation center. Chiron didn't go in. The door was far too low for him. But when the campers saw him, they all stood and bowed respectfully. Ugh. Well then, Chiron said, good luck, Percy. I'll see you at dinner. He galloped away towards the archery range. I stood in the doorway looking at the kids. They weren't bowing anymore. They were staring at me, sizing me up. I knew the routine. I'd gone through it enough at schools. Well, Annabeth prompted, go on. So, naturally, I tripped coming in the door and made a total fool of myself. There were some snickers from the campers, but none of them said anything. Annabeth announced, Percy Jackson, meet Cabin 11. Regular or undetermined, someone asked. I didn't know what to say, but Annabeth said, undetermined. Everybody groaned. A guy who was a little older than the rest came forward. Now, campers. That's what we're here for. Welcome, Percy. You can have the spot on the floor right over there. The guy was about 19. He looked pretty cool. He was tall and muscular with short cropped sandy hair and a friendly smile. He wore an orange tank top, cut-off sandals, and a leather necklace with 5 different colored clay beads. The only thing unsettling about his appearance was a thick white scar that ran just beneath his right eye to his jaw, like an old knife slash. This is Luke, Annabeth said, and her voice sounded different somehow. I glanced over and could have sworn she was blushing. She saw me looking, and her expression hardened again. He's your counselor for now. For now? I asked. You're undetermined, Luke explained, patiently. They don't know what cabin to put you in, so you're here. Cabin 11 takes all newcomers, all visitors. Naturally, we would. Hermes, our patron, is the god of the travelers. I looked at the tiny section of floor they'd given me. I had nothing to put there to mark it as my own. No luggage, no clothes, no sleeping bag. Just the Minotaur horn. I thought about setting that down, but then I remembered that Hermes was also the god of thieves. I looked around at the campers' faces, some sullen and suspicious, some grinning stupidly, even some eyeing me up as if they were waiting for a chance to pick my pockets. How long will I be here? I asked. Good question, Luke said. Until you're determined. How long will that take? The campers laughed. Come on, Annabeth told me. I'll show you the volleyball court. I've already seen it. Come on. She grabbed my wrist and dragged me outside. I could hear the kids of Cabin 11 laughing behind me. When we were a few feet away, Annabeth said, Jackson, you have to do better than that. What? She rolled her eyes and mumbled under her breath. I can't believe you thought you were the one. I thought you were the one. What's your problem? I was getting angry now. All I know is I kill some bull guy. Don't talk like that, Annabeth told me. You know how many kids at this camp wish they had your chance. To get killed? To fight the Minotaur. What do you think we train for? I shook my head. Look, if the thing I fought really was the Minotaur, the same one in the stories, yes. Then there's only one, yes. And he died like a gajillion years ago, right? Theseus killed him in the labyrinth, so monsters don't die, Percy. They can be killed, but they don't die. Oh, thanks, that clears it up. They don't have souls like you and me. You can dispel them for a while, maybe even a whole lifetime if you're lucky. But they are primal forces. Chiron calls them archetypes. Eventually, they reform. I thought about Mrs. Dodds. You mean, if I killed one accidentally with a sword, your math teacher, that's right, she's still out there. You just made her very, very mad. How do you know about Mrs. Dodds? You talk in your sleep. You almost called her something. A fury. They're Hades' torturers, right? Annabeth glanced nervously at the ground as if she expected it to open up and swallow her. You shouldn't call them by name, even here. We call them kindly ones if we have to speak of them at all. Look, is there anything we can say without it thundering? I sounded whiny even to myself, but right then I didn't care. Why do I have to stay in cabin 11 anyway? Why is everybody so crowded together? There are plenty of empty bunks right over there. I pointed to the first few cabins. Annabeth turned pale. You don't just choose a cabin, Percy. It depends on who your parents are. Or your parents. She stared at me, waiting for me to get it. My mom is Sally Jackson, I said. She works at the candy store in Grand Central Station. At least she used to. I'm sorry about your mom, Percy, but that's not what I mean. I was talking about your other parent, your dad. He's dead. I never knew him. Annabeth sighed. Clearly she'd had this conversation before with other kids. Your father's not dead, Percy. How can you say that? You know him? No, of course not. Then how can you say, 'cause I know you? You wouldn't be here if you weren't one of us. You don't know anything about me. No? She raised an eyebrow. I bet you moved around from school to school. I bet you were kicked out of a lot of them. How? Diagnosed with dyslexia? Probably ADHD too. I tried to swallow my embarrassment. What does that have to do with anything? Taken together, it's almost a sure sign. The letters float off the page when you read, right? That's because your mind is hardwired for ancient Greek. And the ADHD, you're impulsive, can't sit still in the classroom. That's your battlefield reflexes in a real fight. They keep you alive. As for the attention problems, that's because you see too much. Percy, not too little. Your senses are better than a regular mortal's. Of course, the teachers want you medicated. Most of them are monsters. They don't want you seeing them for what they are. You sound like you went through the same thing. Most kids here did. If you weren't like us, you couldn't have survived the Minotaur, much less the ambrosia and nectar. Ambrosia and nectar? The food and drink we were giving you to make you feel better. To make you better. That stuff would have killed a normal kid. It would have turned your blood to fire and your bones to sand, and you'd be dead. Face it, you're a half-blood. A half-blood. I was reeling with so many questions, I didn't know where to start. Then a husky voice yelled, Well, a newbie. I looked over. The big girl from the ugly red cabin was sauntering towards us. She had 3 other girls behind her, all big and ugly and mean-looking like her, wearing camo jackets. Clarice, Annabeth sighed. Why don't you go polish your spear or something? Sure, Miss Princess, the big girl said, so I can run you through with it Friday night. And she says, Eres Crocs, I don't know. Annabeth said, which I somehow understood was Greek for go to the crows, though I had a feeling it was a worse curse than it sounded. You don't stand a chance. We'll pulverize you, Clarice said, but her eye twitched. Perhaps she wasn't so sure she could follow through on that threat. She turned toward me. Who's this little runt? Percy Jackson, Annabeth said. Meet Clarice, daughter of Ares. I blinked. Like the god of war? Or like the war god? Clarice sneered. You got a problem with that? No, I said, recovering my wits. It explains the bad smell. Clarice growled. We got an initiation ceremony for newbies, Percy. Whatever. Come on, I'll show you. Clarice, Annabeth tried to say. Stay out of it, wise girl. Annabeth looked pained, but she did stay out of it. And I didn't really want her help. I was the new kid. I had to earn my own rep. I handed Annabeth my Minotaur horn and got ready to fight before I knew it, Clarice had me by the neck and was dragging me towards a cinderblock building that I knew immediately was the bathroom. I was kicking and punching. I'd been in plenty of fights before, but this big girl Clarice had hands like iron. She dragged me into the girls' bathroom. There was a line of toilets on one side and a line of shower stalls down the other. It smelled just like any other public bathroom. I was thinking, as much as I could think with Clarice ripping my hair out, that if this place belonged to the gods, they should have been able to afford classier johns. Clarice's friends were all laughing, and I was trying to find the strength I'd use to fight the Minotaur, but it just wasn't there. Like he's big 3 material, Clarice said, pushed me towards one of the toilets. Yeah, right, Minotaur probably fell over laughing. He was so stupid looking. Her friend snickered. Annabeth stood in the corner, watching through her fingers. Clarice bent me over my knees and started pushing my head towards the toilet bowl. It reeked like rusted pipes and, well, like what goes into toilets. I strained to keep my head up. I was looking at the scummy water, thinking, I will not go into that. I won't. Then something happened. I felt a tug in the pit of my stomach. I heard the plumbing rumble, the pipes shudder. Clarice's grip on my hair loosened. Water shot out of the toilet, making an arc straight over my head, and the next thing I knew, I was sprawled on the bathroom tiles with Clarice screaming behind me. I turned just as water blasted out of the toilet again, hitting Clarice straight in the face, so hard it pushed her down onto her butt. The water stayed on her like spray from the fire hose, pushing her backwards into a shower stall. She struggled, gasping, and her friends started coming towards her. But then the other toilets exploded too, and 6 more streams of toilet water blasted them back. The showers acted up too, and together all the fixtures sprayed the camouflage girls right out of the bathroom, spinning them around like pieces of garbage being washed away. As soon as they were out the door, I felt the tug in my gut lessen, and the water shut off as quickly as it had started. The entire bathroom was flooded. Annabeth hadn't been spared. She was dripping wet, but she hadn't been pushed out the door. She was standing in exactly the same place, staring at me in shock. I looked down and realized I was sitting in the only dry spot in the whole room. There was a circle of dry floor around me. I didn't have 1 drop of water on my clothes. Nothing. I stood up, my legs shaky. Annabeth said, How did you... I don't know. We walked to the door. Outside, Clarice and her friends were sprawled in mud, and a bunch of other campers had gathered around to gawk. Clarice's hair was flattened across her face. Her camouflage jacket was sopping, and she smelled like sewage. She gave me a look of absolute hatred. You are dead, new boy. You are totally dead. I probably should have let it go, but I said, You want to gargle with toilet water again, Clarice? Close your mouth. Her friends had to hold her back. They dragged her towards cabin 5 while other campers made way to avoid her flailing feet. Annabeth stared at me. I couldn't tell whether she was just grossed out or angry at me for dousing her. "What?" I demanded. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," she said, "that I want you on my team for Capture the Flag." And that's the end of that chapter. I see some people getting grossed out by the toilet water. Percy is now Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Pretty great. So, are we still wanting another chapter at this point? How did you enjoy that one? Oh, Opal, I didn't realize you left. When did you leave? Did you miss Percy become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom? Sure, yes, good, yes. I see a bunch of yeses. We want to keep going on. The book is better than the movie, I am correct. This scene was left out. I just love this book. I love this whole series. It's so good. Okay. It's funny. Chapter 7. My dinner goes up in smoke. Word of the bathroom incident spread immediately. Wherever I went, campers pointed at me and murmured something about toilet water. Or maybe they were just staring at Annabeth, who was still pretty much dripping wet. She showed me a few more places. The metal shop, where kids were forging their own swords. The arts and crafts room, where satyrs were sandblasting a giant marble statue of a goat man. And the climbing wall, which actually consisted of 2 facing walls that shook violently, dropped boulders, and sprayed lava, and clashed together if you didn't get to the top fast enough. Finally, we returned to the canoeing lake, where the trail led back to the cabins. "I've got training to do," Annabeth said flatly. "Dinner's at 7:30. Just follow your cabin to the mess hall." "Annabeth, I'm sorry about the toilets." "Whatever. It wasn't my fault." She looked at me skeptically, and I realized it was my fault. I had made the water shoot out of the bathroom fixtures. I didn't understand how, but the toilets had responded to me. I had become one with the plumbing. "You need to talk to the Oracle," Annabeth said. "Who?" "Not who. What? The Oracle." "I'll ask Chiron." I stared into the lake, wishing somebody would give me a straight answer for once. I wasn't expecting anyone to be looking back at me from the bottom, so my heart skipped a beat when I noticed 2 teenage girls sitting cross-legged at the base of the pier. About 20 feet below, they wore blue jeans and shimmering green t-shirts, and their brown hair floated loose around their shoulders as minnows darted in and out. They smiled and waved as if I were a long-lost friend. I didn't know what else to do, and I waved back. "Don't encourage them," Annabeth warned. "Naiads are terrible flirts." "Naiads," I repeated, feeling completely overwhelmed. "That's it. I want to go home now." Annabeth frowned. "Don't you get it, Percy? You are home. This is the only safe place on Earth for kids like us." "You mean mentally disturbed kids?" "I mean not human. Not totally human anyway, half human." "Half human and half what?" "I think you know." I didn't want to admit it, but I was afraid I did. I felt a tingling in my limbs, a sensation I sometimes felt when my mom talked about my dad. "God," I said. "Half God." Annabeth nodded. "Your father isn't dead, Percy. He's one of the Olympians." "That's crazy." "Is it? What's the most common thing gods did in the old stories? They ran around falling in love with humans and having kids with them. Do you really think they've changed their habits in the last few millennia? But those are just... I almost said myths again. Then I remembered Chiron's words, warning that in 2,000 years I might be considered a myth. But if all the kids here are half gods, demigods, Annabeth said, that's the official term, or half-bloods. Sorry. Then who's your dad? Her hands tightened around the pier railing. I got the feeling I just trespassed on a sensitive subject. My dad is a professor at West Point, she said. I haven't seen him since I was very small. He teaches American history. He's human. What? You assume it has to be a male god who finds a human female attractive? How sexist is that? Who's your mom, then? Cabin 6. Meaning, Annabeth straightened. Athena, goddess of wisdom and battle. Okay, I thought, why not? And my dad? Undetermined, Annabeth said. Like I told you before, nobody knows. Except my mother. She knew. Maybe not Percy. Gods don't always reveal their identities. My dad would have. He loved her. Annabeth gave me a cautious look. She didn't want to burst my bubble. Maybe you're right. Maybe he'll send a sign. That's the only way to know for sure. Your father has to send you a sign claiming you as his son. Sometimes it happens. You mean sometimes it doesn't? Annabeth ran her palm against the rail. The gods are busy. They have lots of kids and they don't always... Well, sometimes they don't care about us, Percy. They ignore us. I thought about some of the kids I'd seen in the Hermes cabin. Teenagers who'd looked sullen and depressed, as if they were waiting for a call that would never come. I'd known kids like that at Yancey Academy, shuffled off to boarding school by rich parents who didn't have time to deal with them. But gods should behave better. So I'm stuck here, I said. That's it. For the rest of my life? It depends, Annabeth said. Some campers only stay the summer. If you're a child of Aphrodite or Demeter, you're probably not a real powerful force. The monsters might ignore you, so you can get by with a few months of summer training and live in the mortal world for the rest of the year. But for some of us, it's too dangerous to leave. We're year-rounders. In the mortal world, we attract monsters. They sense us. They come to challenge us. Most of the time, they'll ignore us until we're old enough to cause trouble, about 10 or 11 years old. But after that, most demigods either make their way here, or they get killed off. A few manage to survive in the outside world and become famous. Believe me, if I told you the names, you'd know them. Some don't even realize they're demigods, but very few are like that. So monsters can't get in here? Annabeth shook her head. Not unless they're intentionally stalked in the woods or specifically summoned by somebody on the inside. Why would anybody want to summon a monster? Practice fights, practical jokes. Practical jokes? The point is, the borders are sealed to keep mortals and monsters out. From the outside, mortals look into the valley and see nothing unusual. Just a strawberry farm. So, you're a year-rounder? Annabeth nodded. From under the collar of her t-shirt, she pulled a leather necklace with 5 clay beads off, of different colors. It was just like Luke's, except Annabeth also had a big gold ring strung out on it. Like a college ring. I've been here since I was 7, she said. Every August on the last day of the summer session you get a bead, for surviving another year. I've been here longer than most of the counselors. I've been here longer than most of the counselors, and they're in college. Why did you come so young? She twisted the ring on her necklace. None of your business. Oh. I stood there for a minute, in uncomfortable silence. So, could I just walk out of here I could just walk out of here right now if I wanted to? It would be suicide, but you could, with Mr. D's or Chiron's permission. But they wouldn't give permission until the end of the summer session. Unless you were granted a quest. But that hardly ever happens. The last time, her voice trailed off. I could tell from her tone that the last time hadn't gone well. Back in the sick room, I said, when you were feeding me that stuff. Ambrosia? Yeah. You asked me something about the summer solstice. Annabeth's shoulders tensed. So you do know something. Well, no. Back at my old school, I overheard Grover and Chiron talking about it. Grover mentioned the summer solstice. He said something like, we don't have much time. Because of the deadline. What did that mean? She clenched her fists. I wish I knew. Chiron and the satyrs, they know, but they won't tell me. Something is wrong in Olympus. Something pretty major. Last time I was there, everything seemed so normal. You've been to Olympus? Some of us year-rounders, Luke and Clarice and I, and a few others, we took a field trip during the winter solstice. That's when the gods have their big annual council. But how did you get there? The Long Island Railroad, of course. You get off at Penn Station, Empire State Building, special elevator to the 600th floor. She looked at me like she was sure I must know this already. You are a New Yorker, right? Oh, sure. As far as I know, there were only 102 floors in the Empire State Building, but I decided not to point that out. Right. After we visited, Annabeth continued, the weather got weird, as if the gods had started fighting. A couple of times since, I overheard the satyrs talking. The best I can figure out is that something important was stolen, and if it isn't returned by the summer solstice, there's going to be trouble. When you came, I was hoping... Athena can get along with just about anybody, except for Ares, and of course she's got that rivalry with Poseidon. But, aside from that, I thought we could work together. I thought you might know something. I shook my head. I wished I could help her, but I felt too hungry and tired and mentally overloaded to ask any more questions. I've got to get a quest, Annabeth muttered to herself. I'm not too young. If they would just tell me the problem, I could smell barbecue smoke coming from somewhere. Somewhere nearby. Annabeth must have hated... I'm sorry, I'm getting a drink of water. Thirsty, okay. Annabeth must have heard my stomach growl. She told me to go on. She'd catch me later. I left her on the pier, tracing her fingers across the rail as if drawing battle plans. Back at Cabin 11, everybody was talking about and horsing around, waiting for dinner. For the first time, I noticed that a lot of the campers had similar features. Sharp noses, upturned eyebrows, mischievous smiles. They were the kind of kids that teachers would peg as troublemakers. Thankfully, nobody paid much attention to me as I walked over to my spot on the floor and plopped down with my minotaur horn. The counselor, Luke, came over. He had the Hermes family resemblance, too. It was marred by that scar on his right cheek, but his smile was intact. Found you a sleeping bag, he said. And here, I stole you some toiletries from the camp store. I couldn't tell if he was kidding about the stealing part. I said, thanks. No prob. Luke sat next to me, pushed his back against the wall. Tough first day? I don't belong here, I said. I don't even believe in gods. Yeah, he said. That's how we all started. Once you start believing in them, it doesn't get any easier. The bitterness in his voice surprised me, because Luke seemed like a pretty easygoing guy. He looked like he could handle just about anything. So, your dad is Hermes? I asked. He pulled a switchblade out of his back pocket, and for a second I thought he was going to gut me. But he just scraped the mud off the sole of his sandal. Yeah, Hermes. The wing-footed messenger guy? That's him. Messengers. Medicine, travelers, merchants, thieves. Anybody who uses the roads. That's why you're here, enjoying Cabin 11's hospitality. Hermes isn't picky about who he sponsors. I figured Luke didn't mean to call me a nobody. He just had a lot on his mind. You ever meet your dad? I asked. Once. I waited, thinking that if he wanted to tell me, he'd tell me. Apparently he didn't. I wondered if the story had anything to do with how he got his scar. Luke looked up and managed to smile. Don't worry about it, Percy. The campers here, they're mostly good people. After all, we're extended family, right? We can take care of each other. We take care of each other. He seemed to understand how lost I felt. I was grateful for that, because an older guy like him, even if he was a counselor, should have steered clear of an uncool middle schooler like me. But Luke had welcomed me into the cabin. He'd even stolen me some toiletries, which was the nicest thing anybody has done for me all day. I decided to ask him my last big question, the one that had been bothering me all afternoon. Clarice, from Aries, was joking about me being Big 3 material. Then Annabeth, twice, she said I might be the one. She said I should talk to the Oracle. What was all that about? Luke folded his knife. I hate prophecies. What do you mean? His face twitched around the scar. Let's just say I messed things up for everybody else. The last 2 years, ever since my trip to the Garden of Hesperides, sure, went sour. Chiron hasn't allowed me on any more quests. Annabeth's been dying to get out into the world. She pestered Chiron so much, he finally told her he already knew her fate. He'd had a prophecy from the Oracle. He wouldn't tell her the whole thing, but said Annabeth wasn't destined to go out on a quest yet. She had to wait until somebody special came into the camp. Somebody special? Don't worry about it, kid, Luke said. Annabeth wants to think every new camper who comes through here is the omen she's been waiting for. Now come on, it's dinner time. The moment he said it, a horn blew in the distance. Somehow I knew it was a conch shell, even though I'd never heard one before. Luke yelled, 11, fall in. The whole cabin, about 20 of us, filled into the commons yard. We lined up in order of seniority, so of course I was dead last. Campers came from the other cabins too, except for the 3 empty cabins at the end, and cabin 8, which had looked normal in the daytime, but was now starting to glow silver as the sun went down. We marched up the hill to the mess hall pavilion. Satyrs joined us from the meadow. Naiads emerged from the canoeing lake. A few other girls came out of the woods. When I say out of the woods, I mean straight out of the woods. I saw one girl, about 9 or 10 years old, melt from the side of a maple tree and come skipping up the hill. In all, there were maybe 100 campers, a few dozen satyrs, and a dozen assorted wood nymphs and naiads. At the pavilion, the torches blazed around the marble columns. A central fire burned in the bronze brazier the size of a bathtub. Each cabin had its own table, covered in white cloth, trimmed in purple. 4 of the tables were empty, but cabin 11's was way overcrowded. I had to squeeze onto the edge of the bench with half my butt hanging off. I saw Grover sitting at table 12 with Mr. D, a few satyrs, and a couple of plump blonde boys who looked just like Mr. D. Chiron stood to one side, the picnic table being way too small for a centaur. Annabeth sat at table 6 with a bunch of serious-looking athletic kids, all with her gray eyes and honey blonde hair. Clarice sat behind me at Aries' table. She apparently gotten over being hosed down because she was laughing and belching right alongside her friends. Finally, Chiron pounded his hoof against the marble floor of the pavilion, and everybody fell silent. He raised a glass. To the gods. Everybody raised their glasses. To the gods. Wood nymphs came forward with platters of food. Grapes, apples, strawberries, cheese, fresh bread, and, yes, barbecue. My glass was empty, but Luke said, "Speak to it. Whatever you want. Non-alcoholic, of course. I said, "Cherry Coke." The glass filled with sparkling caramel liquid. Then I had an idea. Blue cherry Coke. The soda turned a violent shade of cobalt. I took a cautious sip. Perfect. I drank a toast to my mother. She's not gone, I told myself. Not permanently, anyway. She's in the underworld, and if that's a real place, then someday. "Here you go, Percy," Luke said, handing me a platter of smoked brisket. I loaded my plate and was about to take a big bite when I noticed everybody getting up, carrying their plates towards the fire in the center of the pavilion. I wondered if they were going for dessert or something. "Come on," Luke told me. As I got closer, I saw that everyone was taking a portion of their meal and dropping it into the fire. The ripest strawberry, the juiciest slice of beef, the warmest, most buttery roll. Luke murmured something in my ear. Burnt offerings for the gods. They like the smell." "You're kidding." His look warned me not to take this lightly, but I couldn't help wondering why an immortal, all-powerful being would like the smell of burning food. Luke approached the fire, bowed his head, and tossed in a cluster of fat red grapes. Hermes. I was next. I wished I knew what God's name to say. I finally made a silent plea. "Whoever you are, please tell me. Please." I scraped a big slice of brisket into the flames. When I caught a whiff of the smoke, I didn't gag. It smelled nothing like burning food. It smelled of hot chocolate and fresh-baked brownies, hamburgers on the grill, and wildflowers, and 100 other good things that shouldn't have gone well together, but it did. I could almost believe the gods could live off of that smoke. When everybody had returned to their seat, and finished eating, Chiron pounded his hoof again for our attention. Mr. D got up with a huge sigh. "Yes, I suppose I'd better say hello to all you brats. Well, hello. Our activities director, Chiron, says the next capture the flag is Friday. Cabin 5 presently holds the laurels." A bunch of ugly cheering rose from the Ares table. "Personally," Mr. D continued, "I couldn't care less. But congratulations. Also, I should tell you that we have a new camper today. Peter Johnson." Chiron murmured something. Percy Jackson," Mr. D corrected. "That's right. Hurrah and all that. Now run along to your silly campfire. Go on." Everybody cheered. We all headed down towards the amphitheater, where Apollo's cabin let us sing along. We sang camp songs about gods and ate s'mores and joked around, and the funny thing was, I didn't feel that anyone was staring at me anymore. I felt I was home. Later in the evening, when the sparks from the campfire were curling into the starry sky, the conch horn blew again, and we all filed back to our cabins. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I collapsed on my borrowed sleeping bag. My fingers curled around the Minotaur's horn. I thought about my mom, but I had good thoughts. Her smile, the bedtime stories she'd read me when I was a kid, the way she would tell me not to let the bedbugs bite. When I closed my eyes, I fell asleep instantly. That was my first day at Camp Half-Blood. I wish I'd known how briefly I would get to enjoy my new home. The end of Chapter 7. Thirsty. Thirsty, thirsty. That was a fairly enjoyable chapter, in my opinion. Gotta love his blue Coca-Cola. Blue cherry Coke. And then the last few chapters also just remind me of the Percy Jackson musical, which, after I'm done reading this book, maybe I'll just do a stream where I listen to that with you guys, because it's amazing. I love it. So, let me pull it up. I actually bought the whole album for the musical because it's great and worth spending money on. There's one more chapter. Oh gosh, I'm going to play... Okay, what song from the musical would you like to hear? Maybe the campfire song or Another Terrible Day? Okay, we'll listen to that after I read the last chapter for today. Don't dehydrate. I won't. I have my cup of water right here. So I promised one more chapter, so I'll read one more chapter, and then if you want to stick around, I will be listening to some of the songs with you guys. Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Don't get dehydrated. Let's see. You missed just the last chapter, I think. Maybe a little bit of the other one. Another Terrible Day. That's an amazing song in the musical. I love the musical. Anyway, one more chapter, and it's We Capture the Flag, one of the most iconic chapters in this book. So, get ready. It's an amazing chapter. All the build-up. Okay, let's see. It starts on 107 and ends on 126, so about 20 pages. The campfire song is pretty great, too. I'll play, maybe the campfire song or Another Terrible Day after reading this chapter. Well, Triana Hill's good, but, we haven't gotten to that point yet, so I don't really want to spoil anything. Well, that point. Yeah, that point. They do talk about that in this book, I think. I do love that song, though. I think after I'm done with this book, reading it on stream, we'll listen to the whole musical. But, yeah. Okay. Chapter 8. We Capture a Flag. The next few days, I settled into a routine that felt almost normal if you don't count the fact that I was getting lessons from satyrs and nymphs and a centaur. Each morning I took ancient Greek from Annabeth, and we talked about the gods and the goddesses in present tense, which was kind of weird. I discovered Annabeth was right about my dyslexia. Ancient Greek wasn't that hard for me to read, at least not harder than English. After a couple of mornings, I could stumble through a few lines of Homer without too much headache. The rest of the day, I'd rotate through outdoor activities, looking for something I was good at. Chiron tried to teach me archery, but we found out pretty quickly that I wasn't any good with a bow and arrow. He didn't complain even when he had to de-snag a stray arrow out of his tail. Foot racing? No good either. The wood nymph instructors left me in the dust. They told me not to worry about it. They'd had centuries of practice running away from lovesick gods. But still, it was a little humiliating to be slower than a tree. And wrestling? Forget it. Every time I got on the mat, Clarice would pulverize me. There's more where that came from, punk, she'd mumble in my ear. The only thing I really excelled at was canoeing, and that wasn't the kind of heroic skill people expected to see from a kid who had beaten up the Minotaur. I knew the senior campers and counselors were watching me, trying to decide who my dad was, but they weren't having an easy time of it. I wasn't as strong as the Ares kids, or as good at archery as the Apollo kids. I didn't have Hephaestus' skills with metalwork, or God's forbid Dionysus' way with vines and plants. Luke told me I might be a child of Hermes, a kind of jack of all trades, master of none, but I got the feeling he was just trying to make me feel better. He really didn't know what to make of me either. Despite all that, I liked camp. I got used to the morning fog over the beach, the smell of hot strawberry fields in the afternoon, and even the weird noises of monsters in the woods at night. I would eat dinner with Cabin 11, scrape part of my meal into the fire, and try to feel some connection to my real dad. Nothing came. Just that warm feeling I'd always had, like the memory of his smile. I tried not to think much about my mom, but I kept wondering if gods and monsters were real. If all this magical stuff was possible, surely there was some way to save her, to bring her back. I started to understand Luke's bitterness, and how he seemed to resent his father Hermes. So, okay, maybe gods had important things to do, but couldn't they call once in a while, or thunder or something? Dionysus could make Diet Coke appear out of thin air. Why couldn't my dad, whoever he was, make a phone appear? Thursday afternoon, 3 days after I arrived at camp, Half-Blood, I had my first sword fighting lesson. Everybody from Cabin 11 gathered in the big circular arena, where Luke would be our instructor. We started with basic stabbing and slashing, using some straw-stuffed dummies in Greek armor. I guess I did okay. At least, I understood what I was supposed to do, and my reflexes were good. The problem was, I couldn't find a blade that felt right in my hands. Either they were too heavy, or too light, or too long. Luke tried his best to fix me up, but he agreed that none of the practice blades seemed to work for me. We moved on to dueling in pairs. Luke announced that he would be my partner, since this was my first time. Good luck, one of the campers told me. Luke's the best swordsman in the last 300 years. Maybe he'll go easy on me, I said. The camper snorted. Luke showed me thrusts and parries and shield blocks the hard way. With every swipe, I got a little more battered and bruised. Keep your guard up, Percy, he'd say. Then he'd whap me in the ribs with the flat of his blade. No, not that far up. Whap. Lunge. Whap. Now back. Whap. By the time he called a break, I was soaked in sweat. Everybody swarmed the drinks cooler. Luke poured ice water on his head, which looked like such a good idea, I did the same. Instantly I felt better. Strength surged back into my arms. The sword didn't feel so awkward. Okay, everybody, circle up, Luke ordered. If Percy doesn't mind, I want to give you a little demo. Great, I thought. Let's all watch Percy get pounded. The Hermes guys gathered around. They were suppressing smiles. I figured they'd been in my shoes before. Couldn't wait to see how Luke used me for a punching bag. He told everybody he was going to demonstrate a disarming technique, how to twist the enemy's blade with the flat of your own sword so that he had no choice but to drop the weapon. This is difficult, he stressed. I've had it used against me. No laughing at Percy now. Most swordsmen have to work years to master this technique. He demonstrated the move on me in slow motion. Sure enough, the sword clattered out of my hands. Now in real time, he said, after I retrieved my weapon. We kept sparring until one of us pulls it off. Ready, Percy? I nodded, and Luke came after me. Somehow I kept him from getting a shot at the hilt of my sword. My senses opened up. I saw his attacks coming. I countered. I stepped forward and tried a thrust of my own. Luke deflected it easily, but I saw a change in his face. His eyes narrowed, and he started to press me with more force. The sword grew heavy in my hand. The balance wasn't right. I knew it was only a matter of seconds before Luke took me down, so I figured, what the heck? I tried the disarming maneuver. My blade hit the base of Luke's, and I twisted, putting my whole weight downward into a downward thrust. Clang. Luke's sword rattled against the stones. The tip of my blade was an inch from his undefended chest. The other campers were silent. I lowered my sword. Sorry. For a moment, Luke was too stunned to speak. Sorry? His scarred face broke into a grin. By the gods, Percy, why are you sorry? Show me that again. I didn't want to. The short burst of maniac energy had completely abandoned me. But Luke insisted. This time, there was no contest. The moment our swords connected, Luke hit my hilt and sent my weapon skidding across the floor. After a long pause, somebody in the audience said, "Beginner's luck?" Luke wiped the sweat off his brow. He appraised me with an entirely new interest. Maybe, he said, but I wonder what Percy could do with a balanced sword. Friday afternoon, I was sitting with Grover at the lake. resting from a near-death experience on the climbing wall. Grover had scampered to the top like a mountain goat, but the lava had almost gotten me. My shirt had smoking holes in it. The hairs had been singed off my forearms. We sat on the pier, watching the naiads do underwater basket weaving until I got the nerve to ask Grover how his conversation had gone with Mr. D. His face turned a sickly shade of yellow. "Fine," he said, "just great." "So your career's still on track?" He glanced at me nervously. "Chiron told you I want a searcher's license?" "Well, no. I had no idea what a searcher's license was, but it didn't seem like the right time to ask. He just said you had big plans, and that you needed credit for completing a keeper's assignment. So, did you get it?" Grover looked down at the naiads. Mr. D suspended judgment, he said. "He said I hadn't failed or succeeded with you yet, so our fates were still tied together. If you got a quest and I went along to protect you and we both came back alive, then maybe he'd consider the job complete." My spirits lifted. "Well, that's not so bad, right?" "Wahaha. He might as well have transferred me to a stable cleaning duty. The chances of you getting a quest, and even if you did, why would you want me along?" "Of course I don't want you along." Grover stared glumly into the water. Basket weaving. Must be nice to have a useful skill. I tried to reassure him that he had lots of talents, but that just made him look more miserable. We talked about canoeing and swordplay for a while, then debated the pros and cons of the different gods. Finally, I asked him about the 4 empty cabins. "Number 8, the silver one, belongs to Artemis," he said. "She vowed to be a maiden forever, so of course, no kids. The cabin is, honorary. If she didn't have one, she'd be mad." "Yeah, okay, but the other 3, the ones at the ends, are those the big 3? Grover tensed. "We're getting close to a touchy subject." "No, one of them, number 2, is Hera's," he said. "That's another honorary thing. She's the goddess of marriage, so of course she wouldn't go around having affairs with mortals. That's her husband's job. When we say the big 3, we mean the 3 powerful brothers, the sons of Kronos. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades." "Right. After the great battle with the Titans, they took over the world from their dad and drew lots to decide who got what. Zeus got the sky, I remembered. Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld." "Uh-huh. But Hades doesn't have a cabin here." "No, he doesn't have a throne on Olympus either. He sort of does his own thing down in the underworld." "If he did have a cabin here," Grover shuddered, "well, it wouldn't be pleasant. Let's leave it at that." "But Zeus and Poseidon, they both had like a bazillion kids in the myths. Why are their cabins empty?" Grover shifted his hooves uncomfortably. "About 60 years ago, after World War II, the big 3 agreed that they wouldn't sire any more heroes. Their children were just too powerful. They were affecting the course of human events. Too much. Causing too much carnage. World War II, was basically a fight between the sons of Zeus and Poseidon on one side, and the sons of Hades on the other. The winning side, Zeus and Poseidon, made Hades swear an oath with them. No more affairs with mortal women. They all swore on the river Styx. Thunder boomed. I said, "That's the most serious oath you can make." Grover nodded. "And the brothers kept their word." Sorry, I'm gonna get a drink, guys. Okay. "And the brothers kept their word? No kids?" Grover's face darkened. 17 years ago, Zeus fell off the wagon. There was this TV starlet with a big, fluffy 80s hairdo. He just couldn't help himself. When their child was born, a little girl named Talia, well, the river Styx is serious about promises. Zeus himself got off easy because he's immortal, but he brought a terrible fate on his daughter. But that isn't fair. It wasn't the little girl's fault. Grover hesitated. Percy, children of the Big Three have powers greater than the other half-bloods. They have a strong aura, a scent that attracts monsters. When Hades found out about the girl, he wasn't too happy about Zeus breaking his oath. Hades let the worst monsters out of Tartarus to torment Thalia. A satyr was assigned to be her keeper when she was 12, but there was nothing he could do. He tried to escort her with a couple of other half-bloods she'd befriended. They almost made it. They got all the way to the top of the hill. He pointed across the valley to the pine tree where I'd fought the Minotaur. All three kindly ones were after them, along with a horde of hellhounds. They were about to be overrun when Thalia told her satyr to take the other two half-bloods to safety, while she held off the monsters. She was wounded and tired, and she didn't want to live like a hunted animal. The satyr didn't want to leave her, but he couldn't change her mind. He had to protect the others, so Thalia made her final stand alone at the top of that hill. As she died, Zeus took pity on her. He turned her into that pine tree. Her spirit helps to protect the borders of the valley, and that's why the hill is called Half-Blood Hill. I stared at the pine in the distance. The story made me feel hollow, and guilty too. A girl my age had sacrificed herself to save her friends. She'd faced a whole army of monsters. Next to that, my victory over the Minotaur didn't seem like much. I wondered if I had acted differently. Could I have saved my mother? Grover, I said, have heroes really gone on quests to the underworld? Sometimes, he said. Orpheus, Hercules, Houdini. And have they ever returned? Somebody from the dead? No, never. Orpheus came close. Percy, you're not seriously thinking. No, I lied. I was just wondering. So satyrs always assigned to guard a demigod? Grover studied me warily. I hadn't persuaded him that I'd really dropped the underworld idea. Not always. We go undercover to a lot of schools. We try to sniff out the half-bloods who have the makings of great heroes. If we find one with a very strong aura, like a child of the Big Three, we alert Chiron. He tries to keep an eye on them, since they could really cause huge problems. And you found me. Chiron said that you thought I might be something special. Grover looked as if I'd led him into a trap. I didn't... Oh, listen, don't think like that. If you were... you'd never be allowed on a quest. And I'd never get my license. You're probably a child of Hermes, or maybe even one of the minor gods like Nemesis, the god of revenge. Don't worry, okay? I got the idea he was reassuring himself more than me. That night after dinner, there was a lot more excitement than usual. At last, it was time for Capture the Flag. When the plates were cleared away, the conch horn sounded, and we all stood at our tables. Campers yelled and cheered as Annabeth and two of her siblings ran into the pavilion carrying a silk banner. It was about 10 feet long, glistening gray with paintings of a barn owl above an olive tree. From the opposite side of the pavilion, Clarice and her buddies ran in with another banner of identical size, but gaudy red painted with a bloody spear and a boar's head. I turned to Luke and yelled over the noise. Those are the flags? Yeah. Ares and Athena always lead the teams? Not always, he said, but often. So, if another cabin captures one, what do you do? Repaint the flag? He grinned. You'll see. First, we have to get one. Whose side are we on? He gave me a sly look, as if he knew something I didn't. The scar on his face made him look almost evil in the torchlight. We made a temporary alliance with Athena tonight. Tonight, we get the flag from Ares, and you are going to help. The teams were announced. Athena had made an alliance with Apollo and Hermes, the two biggest cabins. Apparently privileges had been traded, shower times, chore schedules, and the best slots for activities in order to win support. Ares had allied themselves with everybody else: Dionysus, Demeter, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus. From what I had seen, Dionysus' kids were actually good athletes, but there were only two of them. Demeter's kids had the edge with nature skills and outdoor stuff, but they weren't very aggressive. Aphrodite's sons and daughters, I wasn't worried about. They mostly sat out at every activity and checked their reflections in the lake, and did their hair and gossiped. Hephaestus' kids weren't pretty, and there were only 4 of them, but they were big and burly from working in the metal shop all day. They might be a problem. That, of course, left Ares' cabin. A dozen of the biggest, ugliest, meanest kids on Long Island, or anywhere else on the planet. Chiron hammered his hoof of the marble. Hammered his hoof on the marble. There we go, that makes more sense. Heroes, he announced. You know the rules. The creek is the boundary line. The entire forest is fair game. All magic items are allowed. The banner must be prominently displayed and have no more than 2 guards. Prisoners may be disarmed, but may not be bound or gagged. No killing or maiming is allowed. I will serve as referee and battlefield medic. Arm yourselves. He spread his hands and the tables were suddenly covered with equipment. Helmets, bronze swords, spears, oxide shields coated in metal. Whoa, I said. We're really supposed to use these? Luke looked at me as if I were crazy. Unless you want to get skewered by your friends in cabin 5, here. Chiron thought these would fit. You'll be on border patrol. My shield was the size of an NBA backboard with a big catechus in the middle. It weighed about 1,000,000 pounds. I could have snowboarded on it fine, but I hope nobody seriously expected me to run fast. My helmet, like all the helmets on Athena's side, had a blue horsehair plume on top. Ares and their allies had red plumes. Annabeth yelled, "Blue team, forward!" We cheered and shook our swords and followed her down the path to the south woods. The red team yelled taunts at us as they headed off towards the north. I managed to catch up with Annabeth without tripping over my equipment. Hey! She kept marching. So, what's the plan? I asked. Got any magic items you can loan me? Her hand drifted towards her pocket, as if she were afraid I'd stolen something. Just watch Clarice's spear, she said. You don't want that thing touching you. Otherwise, don't worry. We'll take the banner from Ares. Has Luke given you your job? Border patrol, whatever that means. It's easy. Stand by the creek, keep the Reds away. Leave the rest to me. Athena always has a plan. She pushed ahead, leaving me in the dust. Okay, I mumbled. Glad you wanted me on your team. In the warm, sticky night, the woods were dark with fireflies popping in and out of view. Annabeth stationed me next to a little creek. Sorry. How many pages do I have left? I have about 7 pages left. So not that long. Annabeth stationed me next to a little creek that gurgled over some rocks. Then she and the rest of the team scattered into the trees. Standing there alone, with my big blue feathered helmet and my huge shield, I felt like an idiot. The bronze sword, like all the swords I'd tried so far, seemed balanced wrong. The leather grip pulled on my hand like a bowling ball. There was no way anybody would actually attack me, would they? I mean, Olympus had to have liability issues, right? Far away, the conch horn blew. I heard whoops and yells in the woods, the clanking of metal, kids fighting. A blue-plumed ally from Apollo raced past me like a deer, leaped through the creek, and disappeared into the enemy territory. Great, I thought. I miss all the fun, as usual. It should probably only be, definitely under 10 minutes. I really recommend staying to the end. This is a good chapter. But if you can't, that's okay. Well, yeah, definitely under 10 minutes. Probably closer to 5 to 7 if I don't keep pausing. Then I heard a sound that sent a chill up my spine, a low canine growl somewhere close by. I raised my shield instinctively. I had the feeling something was stalking me. Then the growling stopped. I felt the presence retreating. On the other side of the creek, the underbrush exploded. 5 Ares warriors came yelling and screaming out of the dark. "Cream the punk!" Clarice screamed. Her ugly pig eyes glared through the slits of her helmet. She brandished a 5-foot-long spear, its barbed metal tip flickering with red light. Her siblings had only standard issue bronze swords. Not that that made me feel any better. They charged across the stream. There was no help in sight. I could run, or I could defend myself against half the Ares cabin. I managed to sidestep the first kid's swing, but these guys were not as stupid as the Minotaur. They surrounded me and Clarice thrust at me with her spear. My shield deflected the point, but I felt a painful tingling all over my body. My hair stood on end. My shield arm went numb, and the air burned. Electricity. Her stupid spear was electric. I fell back. Another Ares guy slammed me in the chest with the butt of his sword, and I hit the dirt. They could have kicked me into the jelly. They could have kicked me in jelly, but they were too busy laughing. "Give him a haircut," Clarice said. "Grab his hair." I managed to get to my feet. I raised my sword, but Clarice slammed it aside with her spear, as sparks flew. Now both my arms felt numb. "Oh wow," Clarice said. "I'm scared of this guy. Really scared." "The flag is that way," I told her. I wanted to sound angry, but I was afraid it didn't come out that way. "Yeah," one of her siblings said, "but see, we don't care about the flag. We care about the guy who made our cabin look stupid." "You do that without my help," I told them. It probably wasn't the smartest thing to say. 2 of them came at me. I backed up towards the creek. I tried to raise my shield, but Clarice was too fast. Her spear struck me straight in the ribs. If I hadn't been wearing an armored breastplate, I would have been shish kebabbed. As it was, the electric point was just about shocked my teeth out of my mouth. One of her cabin mates slashed his sword across my arm, leaving a good-sized cut. Seeing my own blood made me dizzy, warm and cold at the same time. "No maiming," I managed to say. "Oops," the guy said. "Guess I lost my dessert privileges." He pushed me into the creek, and I landed with a splash. They all laughed. I figured as soon as they were through being amused, I would die. But then something happened. The water seemed to wake up my senses as if I just had a bag of my mom's double espresso jelly beans. Clarice and her cabin mates came into the creek to get me, but I stood to meet them. I knew what to do. I swung the flat of my sword against the first guy's head and knocked his helmet clean off. I hit him so hard I could see his eyes vibrating as he crumpled into the water. Ugly number 2 and ugly number 3 came at me. I slammed one in the face with my shield and used my sword to shear off the other guy's horsehair plume. Both of them backed up quickly. Ugly number 4 didn't look really anxious to attack, but Clarice kept coming, the point of her spear crackling with energy. As soon as she thrust, I caught the shaft between the edge of my shield and my sword, snapping it like a twig. "Ah," she screamed, "you idiot! You corpse-breath worm!" She probably would have said worse, but I smacked her between the eyes with my sword butt and sent her stumbling backwards out of the creek. Then I heard yelling, elated screams, and I saw Luke racing towards the boundary line with the red team's banner lifted high. He was flanked by a couple of Hermes guys covering his retreat. A few Apollos behind them, fighting off the Hephaestus kids. The Ares folk got up, and Clarice muttered a dazed curse. "A trick!" she shouted. "It was a trick!" They staggered after Luke, but it was too late. Everybody converged on the creek. As Luke ran into friendly territory, our side exploded in cheers. The red banner shimmered and turned silver. The boar and the spear were replaced by a huge catechus, the symbol of Cabin 11. Everybody on the blue team picked up Luke and started carrying him around on their shoulders. Chiron cantered out from the woods and blew the conch horn. The game is over. We won. I was about to join the celebration when Annabeth's voice right next to me in the creek said, "Not bad, hero." I looked, but she wasn't there. "Where the heck did you learn to fight like that?" she asked. The air shimmered, and she materialized holding a Yankees baseball cap, as if she'd taken it off her head. Sorry. I felt myself getting angry. I wasn't even fazed by the fact that she'd just been invisible. "You set me up," I said. "You put me here because you knew Clarice would be after me while you sent Luke around the flank. You had it all figured out." Annabeth shrugged. "I told you, Athena always has a plan." "A plan to get me pulverized?" I came as fast as I could. I was about to jump in, but she shrugged. "You didn't need help." Then she noticed my wounded arm. How did you do that?" "Sword cut," I said. "What do you think?" "No, it was a sword cut. Look at it." The blood was gone. Where the huge cut had been, there was a long white scratch, and even that was fading. As I watched, it turned into a small scar and disappeared. I don't get it," I said. Annabeth was thinking hard. I could almost see the gears turning. She looked down at my feet, then at Clarice's broken spear, and said, "Step out of the water, Percy." "What?" "Just do it." I came out of the creek and immediately felt bone tired. My arms started to go numb again. My adrenaline rush left me. I almost fell over, but Annabeth steadied me. "Oh, Styx," she cursed. "This is not good." I assumed it would be Zeus. Before I could ask what she meant, I heard that canine growl again, but much closer than before. A howl ripped through the forest. The campers' cheering died instantly. Chiron shouted something in ancient Greek, which I would realize only later that I had understood perfectly. "Stand ready, my bow. My bow!" Annabeth drew her sword. There on the rocks just above us was a black hound the size of a rhino, with lava-red eyes and fangs like daggers. It was looking straight at me. Nobody moved except Annabeth, who yelled, "Percy, run!" She tried to step in front of me, but the hound was too fast. It leapt over her, an enormous shadow with teeth. Just as it hit me, I stumbled backwards and felt its razor-sharp claws ripping through my armor. There was a cascade of thwacking sounds, like 40 pieces of paper being ripped out, one after another. From the hound's neck sprouted a cluster of arrows. The monster fell dead at my feet. By some miracle, I was still alive. I didn't want to look underneath the ruins of my shredded armor. My chest felt warm and wet. I knew I was badly cut. Another second, and the monster would have turned me into 100 pounds of delicacy and meat. Chiron trotted up next to us, a bow in hand, his face grim. "D'immortales," Annabeth said. "That's a hellhound from the fields of punishment. They're not supposed to." "Somebody summoned it," Chiron said. "Someone inside this camp." Luke came over to the banner in his hand forgotten, his moment of glory gone. Clarice yelled, "It's all Percy's fault. Percy summoned it." "Be quiet, child," Chiron told her. We watched the body of the hellhound melt into the shadow, soaking into the ground until it disappeared. "You're wounded," Annabeth told me. "Quick, Percy, get into the water." "I'm okay." "No, you're not," she said. "Chiron, watch this." I was too tired to argue. I stepped back into the creek. The whole camp gathering around me. Instantly I felt better. I could feel the cuts on my chest closing up. Some of the campers gasped. "Look, I don't know why," I said, trying to apologize. "I'm sorry." But they weren't watching my wounds heal. They were staring at something above my head. "Percy," Annabeth said, pointing. By the time I looked up, the sign was already fading, but I could still make out the hologram of green light spinning and gleaming. A 3-tipped spear, a trident. "Your father," Annabeth murmured. "This is really not good." "It is determined." Chiron announced. All around me, campers started kneeling, even the Ares cabin, though they didn't look happy about it. My father? I asked, completely bewildered. Poseidon, said Chiron. Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses. Hail Perseus Jackson, son of the sea god. And we end. That was a long chapter, I will admit. Yeah, that's probably like one of the longest chapters. Or maybe not. Thanks for everybody who stuck around to the end. I really wanted to get through that for you guys. So, yeah. Actually, yeah, pretty long. Okay. So, to all of you people who are new to Percy Jackson, again, was it exciting? Was it amazing? Do you understand why this is probably one of my favorite book series? I don't know. I feel like I'm getting repetitive. What time tomorrow? Oh gosh. I don't know if I can do one tomorrow. I'm pretty busy. But if I am able to do one, it'll be around 1 o'clock. 1 to 3, somewhere in there. I probably won't, because like I said, I've got a lot going on tomorrow. I don't know. Would you guys want me to continue this with you guys? No, that was a dumb sentence, but yeah. You want to continue it on stream? Would you like me to get through the whole series? Oh gosh, that is a thought. I don't know if I'll end up doing that. At least the first one. Yes, PM. I'm not going on at 1 in the morning. People are saying yes. Okay. Now, to those of you able to stay, I might start a separate live stream, not reading. Yes, I was reading the Percy Jackson books on stream. I have just ended that, and I'm probably going to restart the stream under a different name. Maybe I'll pause for a bit. I'll probably do some drawings, and then I want to get some book recommendations by you guys. So, yeah. To all of you who can stay, or want to stay, please, stay tuned for that. I'm going to take a little bit of a break, to give my voice a break, and then I'll be back on. Oh gosh, do all of them. Song from the musical. I'll do that in the next stream. Okay, Tanglewood? Pick which song you want, though. Maybe I'll play a few in the next stream. That's okay, Opal. I'm glad you could just stay for the end of the reading. Okay, I'm gonna take my break real quick.